There are a lot of big questions in philosophy, and it can be quite difficult to find the time to think about them. So we're going to head out to where I like to think best, on the road. And so in the next set of videos, we're going to consider the big questions that are raised in the Philosophy According to Eddie video series. And we're going to inquire into some of those big ideas that we otherwise might not have had a chance to think about. We're going to start with Plato and Aristotle, back to the beginning. You have to think about whether the rational approach from Plato is better, with the form of good as the driver of knowledge and reality, or whether Aristotle's ideas work better, with his ideas of empiricism and with the prime mover driving it all. Welcome to the Motorcycle Enquiries.
So when we come to evaluating Plato and Aristotle, we need to start by thinking about Plato and his rationalism. And there are some strengths to Plato's rationalism. A priori logic and rational thinking does work. If it's done correctly, it does lead to a certain understanding. But yeah, you can work out from innate truths that you know more truths, and they should be true, which is what Menno's slave boy did, as long as you don't think that the leading questions kind of undermine that, which they do a bit. But then there's also the forms. The forms seem to explain why it is that we can look at a tree and know it's a tree, even though we might not have ever seen it before. It's because we remember the form of the tree. So it explains this one over many idea. The problem is there are issues as well. The forms are useful for maths and logic, but not subjective experiences. I'm looking at the sky right now, and it is incredibly blue, but you couldn't really explain rough road. Feeling the rough road as well. That's a subjective experience, and yeah, you wouldn't necessarily be able to work those out rationally. The sensors aren't 100% believable, but that doesn't mean that they're useless. I mean, they're helping me stay on my bike right now. And also, this idea of the forms allowing us to know what trees and buildings look like. For example, look, there's a building over there on the left, old windmill. Quite a few around here. Wittgenstein has a counter-suggestion. He suggests family resemblance theory. We know what things look like because we see one building, we see another building, we see another building, and we start to pick up what buildings look like, and so we can recognise them when we see them. And this fits more with science. And Plato leaves quite a lot of questions unanswered. How do we experience the forms? If there's no direct link to them, if it's like our soul remembering them, how do we know that the forms are the ultimate knowledge? Is there maybe a form for the forms? What about... Oh, it's Kestrel over there. And what about numbers? Does the number 1 have a form of the number 1? Does it have a form of the number? Plato leaves a lot of these questions unanswered, and that's not good in philosophy. We need to have answers. And then we need to also think about the form of the good, which is supposed to be this sort of overall top level of form. And it does explain how we could know moral truths, why the forms come from where they do, because the form of good illuminates them. And it explains why morality could be absolute and perfect and unchanging. And this has affected our understanding of Christian God as well, as being absolute, perfect and unchanging. But again, there are issues. The fact-value problem comes up. We can't logically establish values from facts. So, we can't say factually the form of the good exists, therefore we ought to do this, because the two don't mix together. That's David Hume's idea. And how is it possible to experience the forms if there's no direct personal connection? Well, how do we experience morality then? How do we know what's moral and what's not if we don't have a strict connection? Oh, they're turning this way. Oh, this is going to be tight. Breathe in. Oh. So, how do we know exactly what's moral and what's true if we're having to rely on the world of appearances, which we have to do? And this is where Aristotle starts to become a bit more appealing, because he suggests that actually empirical knowledge is more useful. And it is, actually, empirical knowledge is very useful because we have a direct connection to the world this way. and it matches our common sense. These sense experiences that I'm having are useful to me right now. I'm finding them very useful, in fact. And the idea that our minds are like a blank slate that we then build on with experience matches up with science and our scientific understanding of the mind. But we can't escape the fact that our senses can deceive us. We can be deluded. So can we really call it knowledge? At least what Plato describes as knowledge is true knowledge. It's not opinion. And if scientific ideas are based on empiricism, which are Aristotle's ideas, then maybe all science would naturally match up with Aristotle, because we're kind of using him as a template. So maybe we're not proving very much there. And also this claim about objects all having purposes and all having designs, maybe there is no purpose, maybe there is no design, we're just finding it. That's a logical fallacy, we're trying to find an explanation for it. It's a post hoc, propter hoc fallacy. Then we get into the prime mover idea. This idea that there is this thing that's giving us all purpose. Well, we've got no direct personal knowledge of it. How can we claim that the prime mover actually exists? No, they're not moving, we're good. But, having said that, the prime mover not being aware of us, that would explain why it is that we don't have a... Oh, I didn't know they were going to stop there. It would explain why we don't have a personal connection with it, if it's not aware of us. But the problem with both Aristotle and Plato is that they're coming up with these ideas, but they're not really giving us any real reasons to believe it. That road looks a bit dodgy. I think I'll have to skirt round. Yeah, we're good. They've come up with some ideas about our knowledge, which comes from either rational knowledge or empirical knowledge, but then they've built on it and they've added ideas like the forms, or the prime mover, or the four causes, which are more contentious. It's not necessarily obvious that it's true. So overall, if we're assessing them, both Plato and Aristotle have got strengths. Aristotle's a bit more common sense. Plato is giving us more fixed ideas, so stuff that we can actually rely on an absolute basis. But both of them probably overstretch their reach a bit.